Hey again, Joe Gilder here. In this episode, we're going to hone our attention over here on the right-hand side of the mix session, where this here mix bus processing goes, okay? So, you may have remembered, my English is awful. You may remember back early in the process when I talked about how I have gotten a kick lately out of using a multiband compressor on my mix bus as my mix bus compressor, with the idea that I tend to use it in mastering. It tends to make things sound a little bit brighter for me, and I tend to mix kind of dark, so that seemed like a good combination. But I found myself just on a few recent projects missing some of the warmth that comes from a standard compressor. You know, typical 30 millisecond attack, 100 millisecond release, normal compressor, like an SSL or things like that tend to, because they're affecting the entire signal, they tend to warm things up to my ear, where the bass gets just a little beefier, not like louder, but just it softens a little bit. And I think it's because the low frequencies tend to be the ones that trigger the compression more than the highs. So the highs get just a little bit of pumping, a little bit of ducking, that if you don't overdo it, can just be add a nice pleasing warmth to your mix. So I'm going to do that in here. So the original setting here was just a multiband compressor, 3 bands, all the exact same ratio, threshold, 2-to-1 ratio. The threshold was exactly the same on all of them. The attack was really low, 100 millisecond attack and release. So I still like that setting, but I've got a new preset that I use. So it's not a preset, I guess a channel strip that I set up. And I call it Mix Bus. So when I click this, you'll see it'll pull in a compressor and a multiband. So let me pull both of those up so you can see them together. All right. Oh, you're not going to let me pull them up together. Here we go. All right, so let me see if I can organize these in a way that you can see them nicely. Okay. So you may notice the multiband is exactly the same. It's the 2-to-1 ratio, 100 millisecond attack and release. The threshold at -20, which is about right for the level that I mix, using the K-system metering and all that. The only difference is I've got a little bit of gain here of 1 dB. I may have had that before, I can't remember. Now, in addition to that, I've added this. I had it all set out nice and pretty, and I ruined it. I wrecked it. Okay, so before the multiband, essentially all I've done is inserted a standard single band compressor, otherwise known as a compressor, and it's kind of the same idea, same ratio, same threshold. So it's 2-to-1 ratio, -20 threshold. Attack is at 30 milliseconds, release is at 100. I found 30 feels kind of good. As long as you don't overcompress, it's enough time to let some of the thickness of like the kick and the snap and punch of the snare, to let those come through. And if you don't overcompress, it can sound really nice. So what you'll find, and the same thing here, I have an output gain of 1 dB. So each of them is adding a dB of gain, but in theory, they should be knocking down roughly a dB or so. So the overall volume should be roughly the same, but the idea is we're getting a little bit best of both worlds when it comes to using these. So let's just take a listen and let you hear kind of what it's doing to the mix. So we'll go into maybe this pre-chorus here. Let me find a spot. Sure. That's a great spot. Let's do it there. And I'll start off without any of these on, and you'll see me click them on. The little power buttons will light up, and that will mean they are activated. I'll move it down here so you can see it. And when they're activated, just listen to the differences, mainly to me in the low end, but also in the high end. I'll do both of them together, and then we'll listen to them separate. And we'll see if we like it, because that's always the final verdict is, I like this in theory. I've used it on other mixes and liked it. I may hate it here, and I may go back to just the multiband, but I have a sneaky suspicion I might like it. So here we go. I'm going to start off without the compression, then I'll turn it on. Always looking over my shoulder, always looking up that ladder, never see what's right in front of me. So I kind of dig it. It's not a huge difference, but it does, to me, it adds a little bit of volume, which I admit it kind of blows away any sort of scientific comparison. But I do like what it does to the kick and the snare, and I like kind of what it does to the vocal a little bit too, and then the bass. So here it is. Let's go to that second verse, which has it's a little more sparse. Maybe we can hear it a little bit better. So again, I'll turn both of them off and then turn them back on. Here we go. They tell us it's a zero-sum game. If I want it, then I've got to take it away. Take it away. Now, I hear Ian Shepherd whispering in my ear, this isn't a fair comparison because because it is a little bit louder. So what we're going to do, I'm going to use Perception plugin that Ian developed, which is for mastering, but allows me to level match the before and after. And we're going to do that. Okay. So let me pull down the volume so I don't blow anybody's ears out. And we'll listen to what actually is happening at the exact same volume, because I think that's a fair comparison because it's the thing that's happening over our entire mix. So it makes sense that we would, give it the attention it deserves. So it's looking like it is about 1.5 dB of difference in volume because we're not hitting the compressors very much. So let's balance them. Let's sync up the timing differences between the two. All right. Got to give it away. Give it away. Okay, so now when I click this and it goes into bypass mode, when it turns yellow, the compressors are off. And when it goes to white, they're back on. So now we will listen and get an idea of what the difference really is there. They tell us it's a zero-sum game. If I want it, then I've got to take it away. Take it away. But the truth was always the same. If I want it, I've got to give it away. Give it away. Always looking up. That was super interesting and super fun. Go back and listen to that section over and over again. If you have it, make sure you're listening. And if you're on Facebook, go to YouTube because Facebook audio is awful. Sorry, it just is. Go to YouTube, listen in the highest HD that you can get. So it should be 1080 will be the best audio quality. And then listen to that over and over again a few times. I'll tell you what I hear. If you want to stop the video now, go back and listen a few times and make your own assessments and then come back to this spot in the video and I'll tell you what I hear. Okay, so go back. Welcome back. Okay, so what I hear is when I bypass the effects, it actually feels like there's more bass. It feels more boom, boom, like bigger kind of kick drum and bass coming through, kicking me in the chest. And initially, I was thinking, well, maybe I don't like this. But upon further listening, so it's important to note your initial reaction, but also take it in context of how is it helping or hurting the mix. And what I heard when I listened to it and turned it on and off a few times was while yes, the bass was louder with those bypassed, it actually, the low end felt tighter and more contained with the compression in place. So while the bass got down in a little bit in volume, it felt more consistent and it felt very much like a finished mix as opposed to almost a little bit too loud beforehand. So I like that about it. Also, listening to the kick and especially the snare before kind of felt like it jumped out of the mix, right? Like it needed to be contained a little bit. Afterward, the snare kind of had this really just kind of quick, like somebody was holding it in place, which would be both the compressors working on that snare drum just a little bit. Everything else in the mix I felt was kind of roughly the same, maybe a little bit warmer or a little bit brighter, I'm not sure, but those are the big things that I heard. The bass and the snare drum and the kick drums were all a little more contained and a little more focused and a little more, I think contained is the best word. They were working together better than they were before. So this is me giving you permission. If this kind of scares you and you don't like the idea of putting all this stuff on your mix bus, then just ignore this completely. But what I found is if you're mixing it and you're also going to master it yourself, sometimes it's nice to put some of this processing on during mixing because it will affect your decisions. If I was mixing this without those compressors, I'd be pulling the bass down, I'd be pulling the snare down, or I'd be putting compressors on the individual snare track, trying to tame it, when I think it works better and feels more natural to have it tamed at the bus compressor as opposed to having it tamed at the individual track in this particular mix and this style of music. And so for me, when I would go to master this, or if I send it to someone else, it's more like I would want it to be. And mastering isn't going to do major things to change the sound because we forgot to do anything to our entire mix on the bus, if that makes sense. So go try it out. And the big thing to keep in mind is you'll notice, I'll hit play, mute the audio, but you can just see it's not doing a lot, right? It's just a few dB here and there. It's just kissing the top of the mix, right? But it is making a difference. Now, if you saw this slamming at 6 dB at each spot, then yeah, we've gone too far and it's probably a noticeable audible difference that's not good. But keeping it subtle and putting two of these together, I kind of like that combination. Who knows how long I'll be doing this, but I'm liking the results that I'm getting. So there's something for you to try on your mix bus as well. In the next video, we're going to probably just circle around and see if anything else is bothering us. And I'm feeling better and better about this episode and the last episode. I feel much better about this mix and how it's going, especially since we kind of fixed the vocals in the last episode. If you haven't seen that, go back and watch that. The vocals have been kind of an epic journey. They're not the best vocals in the world. I'm not the best singer in the world. But I feel like we're honing in on something pretty special and pretty cool. Everything's feeling good, so we may only be a handful of episodes away from being done. So stick around, and if you haven't done your mix, be sure to go over to homestudiocorner.com/MT for Mix Together. You can sign up to get these tracks for free, and then you can mix along with me while you watch the videos. That would be one of the better ways to learn this stuff, is make sure you're doing it yourself. All right, that's it for this episode, though. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.